Good morning, good evening, good day. This is the Danny Schneider Show of Music, and I'm Danny Schneider, of course. Today I have a wonderful guest, Jerry Tolmich, who's been in the record business over 59 years and is part of the history of Los Angeles music business and the record business. I call it the record business because I think that's when the record business kind of was the record business. Of course, I'm probably sounding like an old person now saying that. But anyway, Jerry, thank you so much. We've known you for, it's like my LA father.
Well, let me also thank you for inviting me on your show.
My pleasure, because I really felt it was important that to get some of this history known and recorded on tape. And because I know you with Sid Tolmich had record merchandising
and
company and Record Rack here, a record distributor in LA that was instrumental in so many historic records. We'll get to that in a minute, but first I thought maybe a little background on you. Maybe you could tell us what got you into the music business and when.
I was a collector of records growing up from the age 13, big bands. And at 14 years old, we had a record store, and I used to mind the record store a couple of hours and be paid $1.
Where was this?
$1 in the Bronx in New York.
Oh.
And for that $1, I used to buy 3 Bluebird records, which had all the big bands. Then we had a theater called the Windsor Theater that had big bands, and through high school, I became a press agent for that theater. We had Duke Ellington, we had Will Osborne, all the big bands, and that's when it all started for me. After high school, I went into the Army, and I stayed 4 years, and when I got out, I was offered a job with a company in New York called Haynes Griffin as a 2-week replacement.
Is this a record store?
It was a record store.
Uh-huh.
Of course, it was all 78s at the time, and
wow. Mm-hmm.
I became manager after 6 weeks. I stayed there 5 years. It was a wonderful experience. But one of the funny stories I can remember about that whole store was we had an album called The Jolson Story from the movie by Larry Parks. Mm-hmm. And they used to come in a package, and you put the records in, 4-record set. But as you put them in,
these are 78s.
78s.
Mm-hmm.
Record 2 would be broken one, then record 4 in another one. It was a mess. Mm-hmm. But that's what happened in that type of business.
Yeah. So you're talking probably then in the late 40s?
I would say closer to 48, 50, yeah, just about then.
Well, I know, too, jumping ahead a little bit, you worked for Columbia Records in...
I joined Columbia. I went up to Hartford, Connecticut, and worked up there for 6 months. The record store was in trouble, and they asked me to come up. And a friend of mine named Dick Link, who became Andy Griffith's manager, but was our big promotion man at Columbia, got me this job with Columbia because they needed a salesman in New York. It was the best experience I ever had in my life.
Now, when you say Columbia, this is before it was called CBS.
It was called Times Columbia.
Oh.
That was the name of the company, and then became CBS. But Times Columbia was a distributor.
Oh, I see.
And our boss was Paul Southard, who was magnificent. He knew everything about the music business, taught me everything about the music business. Mm-hmm. I was the youngest salesman on the road. Mm-hmm. I was 22 or 23.
So as a record salesman, then you went to different record stores and tried to get them to order the records?
Starting with Colony Records, which was the biggest store in New York outside of Sam Goody and all those people. Mm-hmm. But I covered from 42nd Street up to the Bronx. In fact, a very interesting story. There was a store up there called Cousins, and Dean DiMucci, you know who I'm talking about?
Dean DiMucci, I don't know if I do.
Not Dean DiMucci, but he did The Wanderer.
The song The Wanderer?
Yes.
Dion.
That's who it was.
I love that song.
Dion, and I met him up there. He used to hang around the music store.
Oh, is that right?
A long time. But I was lucky. We used to have promotions with Mitch Miller and with the Four Lads in different stores, and I was involved in all that stuff.
Now, when was the transition to 33 or 45? 45s came next, and then 33s?
No,
or
they
what?
came together.
Oh.
It was a fight. 33 and the third, that was way before when I was in the record store, but 33 and the third, they put out a play at Columbia called the Times Columbia, 33 and the third, and then they had the 45 with the big spindle.
Right.
And it was a fight all the way. We had Robert Q. Lewis selling the 33rd player in our store.
Right in your store.
But it was marvelous. Columbia put out...
Robert Q. Lewis, he was the guy on What's My Line?
Yes, he did all that. He died, but he was a marvelous man, a lot of fun. But at Columbia Records, I learned a lot. I learned how to be a salesman at Columbia Records. In fact, I am responsible for Woolworth. I guess you've heard of Woolworth's, Five a Dime.
Sure.
They never put records in their store, and I went in there one day and I saw this girl, and I said, why don't you put a box of a hit that we have and try it? It was Johnny Horton's Battle of New Orleans.
Oh, I love that song. I used to have that album.
She sold them all in 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then she told all the other, and I put LPs in all the stores. And they wrote a nice story to me about that. I was with Columbia for 11 years, had a great time, wouldn't trade it. I learned all about the music business.
I see. And then you weren't involved in the radio part of it, though, huh?
No, we had promotion men who did that.
I see. So then from Columbia, then you, what brought you to Los Angeles then?
My wife, she had the family out here, and she says, why don't we make a change and go out there? And just one day we packed everything and went. But I had a job when I came out with Discount Records.
So you didn't work for the Columbia branch or anything?
No. There was nothing open there. But I came out here and I took 3 months off and went to visit everything in Hollywood and all that. But then I joined this place called Discount Records, and on Wilshire Boulevard. And
Is it still there?
No. It was right across the street from the Stanley Warner Theater.
Okay.
And I was put in there to see if I could build that store up. He was having a lot of trouble. And I had a great idea.
What year was this approximately? This is 60s now?
Oh, yeah, that was 62, 63. What happened was I had a great idea, and I told Marvin about it, Marvin Sains. Why don't I run a holiday sale? Now, this was LPs, run 40% off, and the first one was Thanksgiving. And I put it in the LA Times. I said, from 9 o'clock until 4 o'clock, we'll give you 40% off. I got there at 8 o'clock. They were completely around the block waiting for me to open. We did $40,000 that day.
Wow.
And I did every holiday. He tried it in all his other stores all over the country. Didn't work, just in California.
I wonder why.
Well, it was just the way it was happening that way.
I see.
I stayed with Marvin for quite a while, and then I was offered a job with Discount Records stores with Art Grobart, who taught me all about advertising.
Oh.
And I became his manager, his assistant. And I worked for him for quite a few years. It was brilliant. He was just something else. I loved it every minute.
That was kind of maybe the forerunner of like things like Warehouse Records and Music Plus and all that?
Yes, and also Licorice Pizza.
Right.
And they were all in there, and they were all trying, they would sell it for $2.99, and one guy would say $2.98. It was a battle. It was a battle. But that's what also ruined the record business, that kind of price.
I see, yeah. Well, then, from the retail, then, was the next thing the record merchandising, the distributor here in L.A.?
Let me explain that to you. My uncle, Sid Tolmich, bought the stores that I worked for.
Oh, is that how?
And he said, I told you someday you would work for me. And I went to work for him in record merch, but also was involved with record rack. And what happened was, he said to me, I would like you to open up an advertising agency here. And I did a lot of business. I put out a 45 RPM book, was $10,000. It didn't cost us a dime. I got every company to run an ad in that book. And it was a Bible for every salesman.
Oh, I see. Okay. So let me see if I can get this straight here a little bit. So all the Sid Tolmich, your uncle, bought, how many stores do you think he had?
I think he had 10.
10, just, were they all different? I mean, they were all...
They were located from Fresno to the Valley, to Los Angeles, everywhere. There was 10 stores.
So then his business then was to be a kind of a hub or a distribution center for mainly those 10 stores at first?
Yeah, but they ran by themselves. I mean, there was no problem. We had a manager in each store, and I was in charge of all 10 stores. I had to take care of them.
So then record merch, for those who, you know, when we were talking about record merch, it was in Los Angeles during, I believe, like during the 60s, was the place all records were distributed from, correct?
Well, that was Record Rack. That was being a one-stop, but Record Merch had Motown.
This is before WEA and all those big distributors.
Right. But they had A&M, they had Motown, they had Chubby Checker, they had VJ. They had so many labels, it was unbelievable.
Right.
And he had the big hits.
Uh-huh.
He had The Twist with Chubby Checker. He had all the stuff by Stevie Wonder. He had Carole King's Tapestry. We had so many hits, it was unbelievable.
How the Motown, I know a little bit of the history here, and when Motown first started, the record merch and record rack was the only place in this whole area of the country where the Motown records could be gotten from. Is that correct?
Absolutely, at that time. He also did a thing called The First Family. Do you remember that?
Kennedy and all that stuff?
Yes, and that became such a tremendous hit for him.
That was huge.
It was unbelievable. And then he had Cadence, the Archie Blyer stuff. We had so much that we could distribute, and we had the best salesman in the world. But at the time, we also had Sonny Bono.
Yeah, I was reading this book. I picked up this book. I like to read,
Right.
you know, this is an autobiography that he wrote right after Cher, and this was before he was a congressman. And I'm reading along, and he goes, in 1961, when my bank account got lower than my car's gas tank, I closed the door to the musty office that I called Gold Records and took a promotion job with Record Merchandising, an independent distributor owned by Sid Tolmich. And he was a promo man. Sonny Bono worked for your uncle.
Right.
This is before Cher.
Right.
I think he knew Cher then, but this is before
Absolutely.
I Got You, Babe, and all that stuff.
Right.
And do you remember him being around? And what does a promo man do?
Well, he's got to get records played on radio stations. That was their jobs at that time.
And that was a big hullabaloo, for lack of a better word, back then with the promo men and the Dick Clark. And
Oh, yeah, but you see, one of the big things is I knew a man named Don Ante. He was with one of the KFWB. And he told me that, to tell you the truth, we'd get 500 singles. Out of that, maybe 2 would be played, and the other 498 went into the garbage can. And that's what happens. But then came payola, which you know about at the time, and that became a big thing. But Record Merch played it straight. They had a good crew. We had Sam Ginsberg. We had everybody in there who knew what they were doing. They ran it like a good business.
So Sonny Bono worked there. I know some other kind of well-known people.
I'll tell you, Russ Regan.
Yeah.
Russ Regan was also
Tell
a
everybody,
promotion.
you know, who he is.
Russ Regan became a promotion man. Then he went to work for MCA, and he found Neil Diamond, I believe. And then he went to 20th Century Fox, and he had Dan Hill. He was a big man in the business for a long time.
And then didn't he become president of Polygram, or?
He worked for Polygram. He worked in 5 different companies. He was very, very good. Excellent.
And at this time, at Record Merch, it lasted from about the early about 1960
until my uncle died. But
Which-
he went in partners with a man named Sam Ricklin, who owned California Records.
California Record Distributors and all that. I remember them too.
Yeah, and he had a big store there, and it was marvelous. The two worked together. Both sons worked together. My cousin Malcolm and his son Ronnie.
Right. I
And
remember.
that was the day of the record business. It's changed so much today. It really has.
I want to get into that in a second,
Okay.
but I wanted to ask you though about sticking with the Record Merch, because I even worked there for a year or so, picking the 8-track tapes.
Yes,
And
yes.
cassettes and records and 45s. That was during the time period of Ring My Bell by Anita Ward.
Oh,
and
yes.
Donna Summer, Bad Girls and all that.
Gloria Gaynor.
Yeah, Gloria Gaynor. And was that one of the wildest or best times in the music business, the disco? I mean, you're selling 1 million records then, or was it earlier? Or
No,
what's your fondest memory of that
Fondest
time?
memory was the Stevie Wonder time, and also the Diana Ross, the Motown and A&M.
Yeah.
They created great business because of the talent that was in that company.
Yeah.
And Motown wasn't afraid to spend money to make those people big hits.
They really. That's
That's-
where you kind of came into with the advertising, or?
That was the difference, Danny. Let me explain that to you. Years ago, you'd get an artist, and they'd spend money on him. Today, the people like they're merging like Sony and BMG just merged. But they have people that say like Rod Stewart, to give you an idea. They don't have to worry about that. But they're trying to buy a little company like a Record Merch or Tommy Boy who has hits, independents. They don't have to worry about that. They want to go after they don't want to spend money on them.
So I guess the way it works now is maybe an independent company already kind of creates...
They're going to be big again this year. Independents are coming back. They really are. And there's a bunch of them going to spring up on them.
Now, how do independents, though, get their records distributed or on the radio? How do you get attention
They have promotion
nowadays?
men, too.
Oh, okay.
Just like Sid had Sonny, and they had Russ Regan. You know, they have to put them on the radio. I mean, they go up there and what they call they have to see the disc jockeys. If I talk to the TV record librarian, and if you know them, they'll get it played if they like it. They'll get it played. A lot of hits were made that way, but a lot of hits were put in a can too.
Right. So I want to know a little bit too that there's kind of a well-known story about the A&M records and the Lonely Bull and all that. But I mean that Sid, there was no A&M record distribution. Wasn't that their first hit?
Yes, the Lonely Bull was A&M 101, I believe.
That was their very first one.
Very first bull.
Then Sid was the one who distributed that.
Yes, he did.
So if there wasn't for you and your uncle, there would have been there probably would not have been an A&M Records, and there probably would not have been a Herb Alpert.
Remember, you had two smart men in there. You had Jerry Morse and Herb Alpert. And they put this thing together, and they weren't afraid to spend money. And that's the way they did it. Herb was from L.A. Originally. And these guys knew what they were doing. They had hit after hit on LP, like you couldn't believe. Now, from there, we go into another phase of the business, the CD.
Right.
The CD, everything changes with whatever comes out. CD started like $9.98, $10.98. It's now up to $18.98.
Right.
There's no reason for it, but that is. And all the big people like Tower Records, they sell it for $12.98. It's competition on that. But that's the only way you can exist today. Now we also got hi-fi things like people with LPs. Japan is so hot on LPs. They have needles that sell for $100 they put in their machine. You got to come to the CES show, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, and see how many people still buy LPs.
Is that right?
Unbelievable, unbelievable.
In America, or are you saying
both places? In fact, Tower Records has a LP section now.
They do?
Oh yes, oh yes. And I think it's getting bigger and bigger.
Not just the 12-inch ones for the DJs.
But let me tell you something else that's happening, and you're not going to believe this. We're putting out a record called, I told you, The Storyteller. It's a 2-record set by Donovan. One of the records will be 33 1/3. The other one will be a 45 LP. They are now putting out 45 LP, 45 RPM.
You mean with the one with the big hole in the middle?
No, it's a regular hole, but it's going to be, it's at 45 speed and has a great sound.
Because the faster it goes, the better it sounds?
Apparently that's what's happening. So we're getting into that too.
Well, I know a lot of people say that the vinyl, because I used to work at Rare Records.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Ray Avery and all that, and a lot of people would say that the vinyl has a warmer sound.
Well, it's now 180 gram. That's the way to the thing, and they know what they're doing. I mean, I have an engineer, Steve Hoffman, who did all our gold records, of which I was involved in a long time with Marshall Blonstein.
Right.
And
tell everybody what these gold records, CDs were. They were reissues of famous, top albums.
Right. The Doors, for instance, and the Eagles. We would take the tape from, let's say, Warner Brothers, and Steve Hoffman, who was one of the greatest engineers ever, he would redo it. The gold was just gold-plated, had nothing to do with the sound.
Oh, I thought maybe the actual plating made it even more...
No, had nothing to do, it's just gold records, but it preserved it a long time. That's exactly what it did. In fact, the drummer from the Doors called us and said, who did the remastering of this? It's brilliant. I wonder if you can send me 6 copies for myself.
Well, I have a copy of that. I got it from you, yeah. Well, the L.A. Woman.
Oh,
L.A. Woman,
yeah. And we had great jazz stuff, And all the companies wanted us to have capital, yet every company wanted us to do gold.
Because they sold, people got...
They sold for $24.95, and people paid it. I mean, they sold it probably $19 in the store. But the sound was good. The sound was tremendous.
Yeah. And he remastered them and made it sound like he took the masters?
Steve did a remastering. Ray Charles insisted that Steve come over his house and do his remaster. We did 4 albums or 5 albums by Ray Charles. His greatest hits, 1 and 2, and we did Country's Greatest Hits. We did, and Ray Charles and Betty Carter. We did all those.
Wow. Yeah, I remember, thanks to you, we remastered some of my old group and
Right.
Keith Tolmich, your son,
Right.
my songwriting partner. We remastered some of our old tapes with him, and he is kind of a genius.
While you mentioned that, I just want to mention my son, Keith. I think you and he got together around 1979, and his teacher was Randy Rhoads.
Right.
You remember that?
Of course I remember Randy Rhoads, yeah, from Quiet Riot and
Quiet
Legend.
Riot, and also the guy, not Led Zeppelin, the other one, I forgot his name. But anyway, and you and Keith had a great time. You had a great little band called Speed Limit. And I think I went to every single one of your openings, if I remember.
Oh, yeah, you did. Madam Wong's and Whiskey
Roxy.
and Roxy.
Oh, we had a great time.
Palomino.
Right. Now, getting back to where we were now, I would like to say that at my age, at 80 years old, I was just made vice president of a new record company. And Steve Hoffman is also with us. And we're going to actually show our new records at the CES show in January.
You have new artists, or are these remasters?
Let me tell you what we've done. Warner Brothers had some great albums, but they haven't been available for 25 years, 30. So I went up to see up there, and I said, I wanted 2 albums right away. One is called Saxophones Incorporated, and the other one's called Trombones Incorporated. It has every trombone player, every side. They're jazz.
I see.
I had no problem getting it. We're also going to do a show called Hawaiian Eye. It hasn't been available in years. And I've got from Marshall Blonstein, my
Hawaiian Eye, was that a soundtrack?
Yes, it was from the show.
I see.
It had Ponce Ponce, it had Connie Stevens, Bobby Conrad, and it's just a fun thing. Then we also did, we're also doing a thing called Pranks, which is a horror movie. And we're doing a Holocaust album with the Lee Holdridge Strings. I hear it's magnificent. I haven't heard it. Steve's been working on it with a friend called Tom.
This is similar to what you did with the gold records, right?
Exactly.
That sounds like you found a kind of a niche.
Yes, I love doing it.
You can walk, because you're well known in the record business, so you can go to Warner Brothers and say, hey, you remember this big record? They might not be that interested anymore in that record, but they still would be interested in you putting it out. Then they get some royalties.
Well, you got to understand, Rhino puts out a lot of their stuff.
Like Rhino, too.
Rhino.
Similar to that, huh?
They're together with Warner Brothers, and they put out a lot. I wanted Sinatra. I couldn't get it. There's a lot of stuff we tried to get, we couldn't get. I want to do Peter, Paul, and Mary, some of the old stuff.
Right.
Eventually, I've got some more stuff that we're going to give to them, but at the moment, we're happy with what we got.
I see. And so then you're going to be in Vegas at the CES?
At the CES show at the, at the Alexis Park. It's in 3 hotels, but all the record people are in Alexis Park. There's no gambling there.
Oh.
And I'll tell you, you just got to see what goes on there.
I'd love to
All
go.
the independent producers of their companies are doing it. They come up there and they put their stuff out, and you wouldn't believe what you see. Brand new releases. And we have artists performing up there.
Yeah.
Like blues and everything.
You know, we have like 2 minutes left. I know time always flies. Is there any last thing? I mean, I would ask you to tell a joke, or do you want to tell? Because I know you tell a lot of good jokes. Okay, do you want to tell any jokes? Or are there anything you could tell up-and-coming people that want to be in the record business, or a musician that would want to get their record now? What could you do now? What's your perspective on now versus then? Or
Well, it's very difficult now, unless you go to an independent and they say, hey, this sounds good, we'll take it. But you got to, they have things in Billboard, the magazine, and Variety. There's always a place you can look and they'll tell you where to send it. But you got to understand something. The people in the record business are a nice knit bunch of people. It's changed. We understand that. I like the olden days better than I do the new days because you had to work. If a man went into your store and said, I'd like to buy South Pacific, if you could sell him My Fair Lady, you've done a job. You don't have to do that today because they say it's over there. It's a big difference with computers and everything else.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, I always call you JT. It's hard to say Jerry, but
right.
Thank you so much for
Annie,
sharing your expertise with us
I enjoyed
today.
this. I haven't done this, but I think that you've done a wonderful job, and
thanks.
I want to thank you for the questions.
Yeah, my pleasure. And
it brought back memories at the same time.
Me too. I have great memories of back then too. Okay, well, I have a little song I recorded last week with my band, and it was one I wrote with Keith called
good.
"It's Better to Trust in the Lord."
Right.
And so I think we'll close the show by playing a little bit of that. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night, and thanks again.
Trust in